The legendary samurai in California. Mr. Nagasawa lived a life more extraordinary than fiction. Born into a samurai family, Mr. Nagasawa escaped from the Japanese shogunate to become a member of a sect, and eventually became known as the California Wine King. Just an hour's drive north of San Francisco, you'll find the rolling hills of Sonoma County, one of the world's top wine-growing regions for more than a century. Many of the area's first vines were planted in the mid-1850s by European settlers who wanted to experiment with grapes from the famous wine regions of France and Germany. But California's viticulture gained recognition, thanks to a Japanese immigrant named Kanayi Nagasawa. Leaving his homeland on a secret mission, Kanayi Nagasawa became America's first Japanese resident and helped birth the California wine industry. In his heyday in the early 20th century, he operated one of the largest wineries in California, producing more than 760,000 liters of wine a year from the vineyards of the city's 8-square-mile Fountain Grove estate. Santa Rosa. The king of wine helped the famous American botanist Luther Burbank teach horticulture, consultations with international Japanese dignitaries, and received guests such as Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, John Muir at his lavish Sonoma estate. Mr. Nagasawa, however, was largely forgotten until local grape growers Walter and Marichka Byck bought land next to the old Fountain Grove estate. In the course of researching the region's history, they uncover a complex legacy of victories, prejudices and losses. My mother wanted to restore the heritage of our land, and when she learned about Mr. Nagasawa, she wanted to tell this wonderful story about an important historical figure in Sonoma County that very few people know about, said Mr. Rene Byck, her son Marichka and owner of Paradise Ridge Winery, said. In 1996, in the Byck's family's small winery, an exhibition on Mr. Nagasawa debuted with the help of the Sonoma County Museum and his descendants, Mr. Kasuke Ejishi, Mrs. Amy Mori and their children. Photos of Mr. Nagasawa with his family and the operation of the winery of his day are displayed on the walls. The highlight of the exhibition is a long samurai sword that Mr. Nagasawa brought back from Japan after a home visit. That sword was very important to Nagasawa because when they came to America, they were forced to cut their hair and give up their sword, said Mary Ejishi, Nagasawa's great-grandson. But my father said that he said to his children, "Education will be our sword." Mr. Nagasawa's extraordinary story begins in 1864, when 19 young samurai from Kagoshima City's Satsuma Peninsula were sent out of Japan on a secret mission to research science and technology. The West. The youngest of the group, 13-year-old Hikosuke Isanaga, went to Scotland and changed his name to Kanayi Nagasawa to protect his family, as it was illegal to go outside of Japan at the time. There he came under the radar of a religious leader named Thomas Lake Harris, who was recruiting new members to join his sect called the Brotherhood of the New Life. New Life. Mr. Harris brought Mr. Nagasawa and several other samurai to upstate New York, where he established a commune on the shores of Lake Erie. When Mr. Harris decided to move the community to a 2.4 square kilometer rural area in western Sonoma County in 1875, Mr. Nagasawa, then 25 years old, went with him. "I think Harris is like a father to her," said Karen Ejishi Perkins, Mary's sister. "She left Japan too young and doesn't have any family in America, so Harris is all she has." Naming the estate Fountain Grove, Mr. Harris began growing grapes and put Mr. Nagasawa in charge of the operation. The winery quickly prospered, but the Western Eden, as the community itself describes it, began to make San Francisco more scandalous than ever, with swashbuckling parties that eventually led to the disgraceful passing of Mr. Harris. After Mr. Harris's departure, Mr. Nagasawa took ownership of the land and rose rapidly to become a respected and influential figure in the state's nascent liquor industry. He also became the first Japanese citizen to permanently reside in the U.S. He used to ride to all the vineyards and farms to give advice on growing grapes and other plants, said Gayle E. Barron, co-author of The Wonder Seekers of Fountain Grove. Miracle in Fountain Grove, said, the townspeople adored him. He played a key role in the growth of the California wine industry, being the first to market our wines to the UK and Europe, added Ms. L. E. Barron, adding, that Mr. Nagasawa was awarded the Order of Merit by the Emperor of Japan in 1915. But all of this ended in one of the darkest chapters in California's history, when Fountain Grove was confiscated by the government as part of the state's discriminatory land law, under which European citizens Asia is prohibited from owning land or businesses. Because he was childless and never married, Mr. Nagasawa tried to keep the family fortune by leaving it to his nephew Kasuke Ejishi, who was born on the estate and is an American citizen. But after Mr. Nagasawa's death in 1934, the underage Mr. Kasuke and his protege quickly took control and sold off the land. In 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, ordering the elimination of the foreign enemy of Japanese Americans. The Nagasawa heirs, still fighting the expropriation in court, were imprisoned in concentration camps. And like about 125,000 other Japanese Americans, who were imprisoned until after World War II ended, the family lost any chance of reclaiming the property. He suffered 2 losses at the hands of the government, so if he's a little bitter it's understandable, Ms. Perkins said of her father, Mr. Kasuke. But I don't think he wanted to pass that on to us. In fact, as children, the children of the Ejishi family knew very little about the family's legacy. I think my father has suppressed his true feelings about this, Mary said. We all know this is where my father and my aunt grew up, but we don't really know the whole story. It wasn't until the late 1970s that the Nagasawa story began to resurface, at least in the local community, when Mrs. L. E. Barron began covering it for the Santa Rosa newspaper. At the same time, Japanese broadcasters came to document the collective legacy of 19 Kagoshima samurai students, many of whom became prominent figures in government and industry after becoming about Japan. It was the Paradise Ridge exhibit that helped the Nagasawa heirs begin to tell their stories. Japanese immigrants are behind the beginnings of so many agricultural industries in California, such as the king of potatoes, king of garlic, and of course the king of wine, says the station's founder said tea farmer Nao Magamai, referring to George Shima, who became the first Japanese-American millionaire thanks to his massive potato harvests, and Kiyoshi Hirosaki, the country's largest garlic producer. But when they were sent to internment camps during World War II, all those stories were forgotten. Now we are trying to rediscover the legacy of these early California pioneers. Just above Paradise Ridge, the city of Santa Rosa established the Nagasawa Community Park in 2007, with its opening ceremony attended by many Nagasawa family members. His family has placed an epitaph in the park, on which his life is summed up in 5 words, the samurai spirit of California.